They're a project, I heard him whisper when she thought I was out of the room. I wasn't supposed to hear that. I had just come back from the garage, barefoot, walking light on the carpet because the baby was finally down for a nap and I didn't want to wake her. I heard my husband's voice, soft and slow, like he was trying not to be heard. I froze just before the doorway. She's progressing fast. They're a project, but one that might actually work. I think we're ahead of schedule. There was a pause, and I thought maybe he was on the phone. I leaned in, just barely peeking around the corner, and there was no phone. Just him and our daughter, still asleep in the crook of his arm, his thumb brushing gently over her temple like he was memorizing her skin. That should have been sweet, should have melted my heart, but it didn't. Something about the way he said project felt clinical, not fatherly, like he was talking about something being tested, not someone he loved. And they, who the hell was they? I didn't say anything that night. I didn't even walk in. I backed out slowly, went out the front door instead, circled the block, came back in 5 minutes later like I was just returning from a late errand. He didn't ask where I'd been. That was the start. Or maybe it wasn't. Maybe that was just when I finally started noticing. He had always been a little intense. Obsessively neat, but not in a charming way. The type to align the edges of cereal boxes in the pantry and memorize the sound of the fridge door sealing shut. I used to think it was anxiety. Maybe some weird trauma from childhood. I told myself he was just trying to create structure because he didn't grow up with any. But after that night, I started watching him closer. And I wish I hadn't. The next strange thing happened 3 days later. I was sorting laundry, nothing unusual, until I noticed something strange in my daughter's clothes pile. A tiny thread of thin silver metal, looped into the seam of one of her onesies. I thought it was a mistake. Some weird clothing defect, until I found another in the waistband of her pajamas. And another, barely tucked into the lining of her baby hat. They were too fine to be wires. Too stiff to be thread. I pulled one out, maybe half an inch long, and it had a faint burn mark at one end. Almost like it had been soldered. I confronted him that night. Asked him point blank what those things were. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You've been tired. I think you're seeing things." But I wasn't, because I saved them, put them in an empty Altoids tin and hid them behind the books in the office closet. The next morning, the tin was gone. So were the wires. But the books? The ones I used to hide them? They had been rearranged, by spine color, left to right, dark to light. I never told him I noticed. By then, the baby had started doing things she shouldn't be doing yet. I'm not one of those moms who thinks their kid is a genius for holding up her head a week early or mimicking a wave. I mean real things, like mouthing letters from the alphabet chart on the fridge, whispering them, one by one, as she stared at the magnets. Like blinking in perfect rhythm with the ticking wall clock. Like reaching for the TV remote and pressing the power button, intentionally, again and again, until I unplugged it. She was 7 months old. He thought it was amazing. She's adapting, he said. They always pick up faster than we expect. And there it was again, they. I started making excuses to stay home from work. Said I had postpartum symptoms, dizziness, migraines. I needed time to think. To watch. To figure out if I was going insane or if something truly sinister was happening under my own roof. I stopped sleeping much. I kept a notebook I didn't even trust to leave in the house. Stashed it in the glove box of my car, beneath an emergency flashlight and a box of tampons, figuring he'd never look there. That notebook filled fast. Little things. Patterns. Dates and behaviors. The days she stared at walls. The times he hummed that same strange melody while feeding her. Not a nursery rhyme. Not something from TV. Just a haunting, tuneless hum that rose and fell like waves, always in the same order, always while he held her. I recorded it once, played it back through software I barely understood. It had a waveform like speech. Not music, not noise, but words, too low for human ears. But the software showed it, rhythm, spacing, intentionality. I showed it to an old friend who worked with audio editing for his podcast. Just told him it was from an old tape. He messaged me back a day later and said, "That's a code, I think." Not sure what kind. Definitely not music. I never told him what it really was. One night, I pretended to be asleep while my husband put her to bed. I'd left the baby monitor on in the kitchen, the good one, the one with audio recording. I told him it was broken. It wasn't. What I heard that night on the playback was the moment everything broke for me. He was rocking her in the chair, whispering the way he did when he thought no one could hear. 22%, he said softly. Neural mirror response within range. Assimilation is holding. She may be the first one we don't have to resequence. My stomach turned. He wasn't even talking like a father anymore. He was talking like a scientist. Like a programmer. Like someone monitoring a device that wasn't working fast enough. He continued, the mother's been destabilizing. Might need intervention if her pattern deviates further. She's intuitive, the last one was, too. Maybe they all are, eventually. The last one? What did that mean? I couldn't breathe. I stared at the monitor like it might bite me. That word, intervention, rang in my head like a siren. And suddenly, I was certain, this wasn't just about the baby. It wasn't just about her. I was part of this somehow. Part of whatever sequence he was running. I thought about running that night. Packing up the baby and driving somewhere, anywhere. I even got as far as putting diapers and a bottle in a backpack. But something made me stop. Some nagging whisper in the back of my brain that said, wait. Watch. Find out the full story before you move. Or you'll always wonder if you left behind someone who could have been saved. So I waited. And then, I went into his office. The one he kept locked with an old-fashioned key, not a keypad or a card. Just a key, like from another era. I found it taped behind his guitar case. I waited until he took his jog, 6:40 p.m. sharp every Monday, 3 miles, back by 7:05. He was predictable like that. I opened the door. The office was dark, cooler than the rest of the house. No windows. The walls were lined with corkboards, each one covered in notes, diagrams, and photos. Photos of her, our daughter. But they weren't from my phone. They weren't from any moment I recognized. Some of them were black and white, like from a security cam. Some were from strange angles, overhead, too high for a phone or hand. Some were infrared, showing her tiny form in glowing reds and yellows. Like she was being tracked for heat. And next to the photos, dates. Measurements. Terms like neuroplastic response window and temporal sync cycle scribbled in Sharpie. Arrows pointing from one stage to the next. Stage 3, speech latency. Stage 4, self-concept mirroring. Stage 5, identity dissonance trigger. Stage 6, intervention event, control reassertion. My knees buckled. I dropped to the floor and tried not to throw up. I flipped through a stack of folders on the desk. One was labeled subjects, failed iterations. Inside, more photos. Children, toddlers, a few older. None of them looked right. Eyes unfocused, faces blurred, not from motion, but from degradation? One had a caption, EJ07, recursive collapse at 14 months. Verbal mimicry exceeded bounds. I grabbed one more folder. It had my name on it. Just my first name. Inside, a printed scan of an old medical form, mine. From when I gave birth. But the file date was wrong. It was dated 2 years before I got pregnant. The notes were extensive, but one thing burned into my vision. Subject approved for integration without knowledge. Pre-selection effective. Social control test in progress. I don't remember leaving the room. I don't remember locking the door again. I just remember standing in the bathroom, staring into the mirror, trying to find something familiar in my own eyes. That night, I slept with my daughter on my chest, a knife in my hand, and one eye open. The next morning, he acted like nothing had changed. He kissed me on the cheek, made coffee, packed the diaper bag like he always did, down to the extra burp cloth he always folded into thirds. There was no sign he knew I'd seen anything. But that was somehow worse. Because it meant he was either so confident I wouldn't do anything, or he had already planned for what I might. I tried to keep things normal. I smiled when he talked. I nodded. I made excuses to stay home again. But I started planning. Really planning. Backup plans. Stash bags. A burner phone hidden under the seat of my car. A cash envelope I kept taped inside the vent of the guest bathroom. I practiced dialing 911 with my eyes closed. Timed how fast I could get her into the car seat without waking her. But no plan felt safe enough. Because every time I looked at her, at our daughter, this creeping doubt wrapped around my spine like ivy. What if she wasn't entirely mine? What if he had built her? It sounded insane even to think. But I remembered the way she stared at lights. The way she blinked in perfect sync with the metronome when he tested her reaction time. He always made it a game. Blink when I do, sunshine. He'd say it like a joke. But she always did, exactly in rhythm, every time, even as an infant. And then there was the journal. I found it 3 nights later, tucked behind a row of books in the garage, books he said he was going to donate but never had. It was leather-bound, hand-stitched, no branding, no markings. But inside, there were pages of notes, charts, observations, written in his hand. But they weren't about her. They were about me. Subject 22b. Emotional deviations increasing. Pattern instability peaking during sleep cycle. Resistance to conditioning higher than projected. Recommends secondary mirror insertion to preserve parameters. Escalation likely within 14 days. There were diagrams of my face. Sketched from memory, but too precise. One page had 6 versions of me, smiling, crying, angry, asleep, confused, blank. Above them, emotive range versus retention rate. Below, current iteration equals threshold candidate. And then, on the last page, just one sentence written in shaky pen. This time I'll get it right. This time. How many times had there been? I went to my mother's house. Told her I needed help. She welcomed me, of course. She always did. She was the one person I still trusted. We stayed there for 3 days. No sign of him. No texts. No calls. Just silence. Too much silence. Then my mother started acting off. She'd forget things. Simple things. Like the baby's name. Or what day it was. She'd stare at the same TV screen for hours, on mute. When I asked her what she was watching, she'd say, The Inside. I thought she meant the name of the show. I checked. Nothing by that title. I asked again the next day. She smiled and said, It's your turn to blink. I didn't sleep that night. Because she had never said anything like that before. Because that wasn't her voice. It sounded like her, yes, but flatter. Like something imitating her with just enough effort to pass. The next morning, I went to check on her and found her in the backyard, barefoot, staring into the trees. Not moving, not blinking, just humming his tune. We left that afternoon. I drove 5 hours to a friend's cabin upstate. No cell reception, no landline, just woods and quiet. I thought we'd be safe. I thought we'd be invisible. But the next morning, the baby monitor turned on by itself. I hadn't even unpacked it. The screen was blank, just static. But underneath the fuzz, the audio was clear. Not speech, not music, that hum, rising and falling like waves on glass. I unplugged it. It kept going. I smashed it against the wall. It kept going. Then it stopped. Not suddenly, like someone finished the phrase. And then came the click. Like a recorder turning off. That night, I dreamed in loops. The cabin, the forest, her face, my face, the hum, the monitor, the journal, the phrase, this time I'll get it right. Every loop ended the same way, with me opening a door and seeing myself watching me. When I woke up, there was something on the floor of the cabin. Near the crib, a page, from his journal, crisp, clean, no dust. Like it had just been printed. It said, They always run. They always forget. She's almost ready. But you're too aware. This time, you're the project. I didn't scream. That's the part one remember best. Not screaming. Because it felt like if I screamed, I would break some rule I didn't know I'd agreed to. Like I'd signal that I knew too much. That I was too far gone to walk it back. So instead, I picked up the page. Folded it, put it in my boot. And I carried my daughter out of that cabin with my hand over her heart like I could shield her from whatever it was that had followed us there. I drove without stopping. Through rain. Through the night. Didn't even check my rear view. I knew there was nothing behind me that wouldn't already be ahead of me too. When I finally stopped, it was in front of an old motel, one I remembered from a road trip with my dad when I was 10. Except I remembered it being demolished. I was almost sure of it. It didn't matter. It had a vacancy sign. It had a key. That was enough. I didn't sleep that night either. But she did. She always did. Peacefully. As if nothing ever touched her. The next day I started making calls. Not to him. I threw my phone out of the car window hours earlier. I called my old professor, a neuropsych specialist I hadn't spoken to in 5 years. Told him I needed to talk about memory inconsistencies. Temporal recursion. Pattern loops. I tried to sound clinical. Rational. Like I was doing research. He didn't laugh. He told me to come see him in person. So I did. He was older, slower. But sharp. Still the same steel blue eyes that saw too much, said too little. He listened for over an hour. Didn't interrupt once. And then he said, What you're describing is a classic case of recursive psychogenic fracture. Usually induced by sustained gaslighting. But, this other layer you're describing, with the data. The metrics, the phrases repeating, that's not delusion. That's schema architecture. I blinked. Schema, what? He nodded slowly. It's an old theory. Fringe. One that got buried in the late 80s. The idea that certain behaviors, human reactions, could be shaped by repeating life events that weren't actually lived. That memories could be injected. Curated. Not erased, but overridden. The perfect conditioning model. If you control the context, you don't need to control the mind. The subject rewrites themselves. I asked him where the theory came from. He hesitated, then said, a joint research project. University linked, private sector money, military adjacent. I only ever saw notes. Then he added, they called it Project Hallow. The name hit like a brick in the gut. Because my daughter's name was Hallie, not short for anything, just Hallie. I asked him what the acronym stood for. He said he didn't know. Or maybe he just wouldn't tell me. But he did say one more thing. They always include a mirror, he said. Not literally, conceptually. A mirrored influence. It's how they manage calibration. There's always a twin pattern. A counterpart. A counterpart. I didn't have another child. That I knew of. But later, when I checked my hospital paperwork, the birth record from when she was born, the printout said live birth, too. But only one APGAR score. Only one ID band was ever wrapped around my wrist. I started to shake. I called the hospital. They had no record of twins. The printout must have been a mistake, they said. But it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something had been removed. Cleanly. And sloppily, at the same time. That night, at the motel, I watched her sleep again. And I noticed something I had never seen before. When she was deep in REM, her eyelids fluttered like all babies do, but her mouth moved too. Forming shapes. Like she was whispering. I recorded it, slowed it down, played it backward. It wasn't clear, but I swear to God, the shape her lips were making wasn't English. It looked like the same sequence of movements he used to make when he thought I wasn't listening. The hum wasn't just a tune. It was language, and she knew it. Maybe she'd always known it. I didn't know where to go next. I was low on money. My mom wasn't answering. I didn't trust anyone in town. And then I remembered something from the journal. A line that seemed like nonsense when I first saw it. Meet point equals 14.2 degrees west, 63.1 degrees north if they resist sequence, reset via echo zone B. I looked it up. That coordinate was off the coast of Iceland. In the middle of the ocean. No land, no structures. But I kept digging. Found a declassified research map from the 90s, barely legible. At that same coordinate, handwritten in faded ink. Phase gate alpha, mirror terminated. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew I needed to find someone who did. So I started digging into my husband's past. Really digging. Not the resume, not the social stuff. The buried things. Old address records. Classmates. Dead links from university directories. Found one name that kept showing up in connection, C. Halden, SYS Arch Consultant. That name meant nothing to me. Until I found a blog entry from 2006. Archived. Barely a paragraph. But it mentioned Hallow. Mentioned closed-cycle parenting environments. Mentioned stochastic twin drift. Then the blog vanished. But I'd already taken a screenshot. I started reaching out on every forum I could find, looking for Halden. Most people ignored me. One replied. Just one. Their username was Echo Calibrate 72. They wrote, stop looking. You're not the first. You're not even the third. You're the mirror. They always let the mirror ask questions. But the answers don't belong to you. If you find the song, don't sing it back. That's how they finish writing you. I didn't reply, but I kept reading the message over and over again. And eventually, I started to hear it, not just in my head. From my daughter's room. She wasn't humming anymore. She was singing. She was singing again the next morning. Not just the hum, not just the sleep-murmured fragments, real words. But not in any language I recognized. It sounded like phonetics strung together with intent. Not babble, not mimicry. It had structure, rhythm, cadence. There was a pattern that felt almost familiar. She sat on the floor, one hand on a wooden spoon, tapping it once every 3 seconds, exactly, like a metronome. Her eyes weren't on me. They weren't on anything, just fixed on the space in front of her, not blank, not glassy. Focused, like she was listening to someone else. Or something else. I asked her softly, Hallie, what are you singing? She didn't answer, just tapped, tap, 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 and then she whispered, the code writes back. I froze. Baby, what did you say? She smiled, not a child's smile, but something practiced. Polite, almost mocking. Then she looked at me and said, you shouldn't have read the journal. I don't remember screaming, or if I did, I don't remember packing, or grabbing her, or throwing the spoon across the room. All I know is that within 10 minutes, I was back in the car. I don't even remember buckling her in. I only remember driving, no idea where to. Just away. But the thing was, she was normal again. Quiet, giggling, babbling like she always had. asking for her bunny, singing actual songs, wheels on the bus, the usual toddler stuff. Looking at me like I was crazy. And for a second, for a full hour of driving, I thought maybe I was. Maybe it was sleep deprivation, PTSD, trauma, whatever. And then I looked in the rearview. She was staring at me. Not smiling, not blinking, just staring. And her mouth was still moving, but the sound coming from her wasn't hers. It was his voice. I nearly crashed the car. Pulled over on the side of a state road, heart hammering, sweat pouring. I climbed into the back seat. She looked at me like nothing happened. She held her arms out and said, "Mommy, hug." And I cried, because I wanted to believe that was real, that she was still her. But I didn't know anymore. I drove us to an old contact of mine, a girl I knew in college who dropped out of neuroscience to work with a fringe group studying what she called preverbal mnemonic contamination, basically the idea that memory formation could be altered before a child had language. She was shocked to hear from me, but agreed to meet. Neutral ground. A park in a town 3 hours north. I made it look like a playdate. We sat on a bench while Hallie chased birds. I told her everything, not all the specifics, but enough. And she said something I didn't expect. "You've described recursive imprint behavior. It's theorized in some neurological models, but not well understood. We used to believe a subject couldn't consciously reflect their own conditioning pattern until about age 5. But what you're describing, it's looped pre-speech cognition." I stared blankly. She added, "It means she's echoing something she didn't learn here." "Then where?" I asked. She didn't answer, just wrote one word on a napkin and passed it to me. "Back." Then she said, "Have you checked the photos?" "What photos?" "From the hospital, from when she was born." "I have," I said. There were only 2, me holding her, and him taking the photo. "Look again," she said. "Zoom in. Look at what's behind you." I left early, made some excuse, drove to a gas station and pulled up the digital copies from my cloud backup. The first photo was just as I remembered, me on the hospital bed, exhausted, sweaty, crying with joy. She was in my arms. He was smiling, but in the back, past the curtain, barely visible in the far right edge of the frame, was a silhouette. Not a nurse, not a doctor, a man in a dark jacket, holding something near his face. Watching, I zoomed in until the image pixelated into nothing. But it was there, a figure, watching, recording, and his jacket had something printed on it. I couldn't read it fully. Just 3 letters, ECH. That night, my burner phone rang. It had never rung before. No one had the number. I answered. A voice, low, male, said just one sentence. "Mirrors don't get to break the glass." Click. Silence. The next day I woke up with scratches on my arms I didn't remember getting. Hallie was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. She said, without turning, "He's coming soon." I said, "Who?" She looked at me then, her face dead serious. Older than it should have been, and said, "Your twin." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because the way she'd said it, "your twin," wasn't just a child repeating a word she'd overheard. It was delivered with the weight of fact. Like she wasn't telling me something new. Like she was reminding me. And worse, something in my chest responded. A pulling, a gravity, as if the idea of having a twin wasn't foreign. Just buried. I drove us north, toward a cabin my father had once owned before he passed. It was isolated, quiet, a place with no signals, no neighbors, no expectations. I hadn't been there in years, but I remembered the keys were still hidden under the third rock by the steps. We got in, and the moment I crossed the threshold, something inside me cracked. Not broke, cracked, like a locked door creaking open. The smell hit me first, cedar, dust, and a faint chemical tang. I recognized it. From the lab. Not a real lab. The dream lab. The one I used to see when I had those vivid childhood nightmares. White walls. Green symbols etched into glass. Long hallways with doors that hummed when they closed. The dreams I'd been told were just stress. Except now I could smell them. I sat Hallie down with snacks and a blanket and started searching the cabin. Everything was still there, old photos, dusty books, the fishing rod my dad had left behind. But tucked behind a loose panel under the bed, I found a small metal box. Smooth, and labeled, cold. Inside, a single flash drive, and an envelope. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a Polaroid, faded, torn, 2 infants, side by side, wearing identical beanies, and me, barely recognizable, in a hospital gown, smiling at them. He was in the photo too. My husband, holding one of the babies. Except, the date printed at the bottom wasn't from Hallie's birth. It was from 2 years earlier. And the hospital? Didn't exist anymore. I checked. It had burned down in 1999. I plugged the flash drive into the cabin's old laptop. Took a while to boot, but it worked. The drive had only one folder, mirror_echo_7. Inside, logs, videos, scans, notes, each one labeled with my name. But not the name I use now. My birth name, the one I legally changed when I got married. The one I hadn't said out loud in years. The one I barely even remembered until I saw it typed in that folder like it had always been waiting for me. One video caught my eye. twin_resync_attempt_4.mov. I clicked play. The screen was dark at first. Then static. Then, me, tied to a chair, eyes open, blinking. Someone behind the camera was asking questions. What do you remember about the other? Silence. Then my voice, weak, slurred, said. She was quieter, but she watched everything. Next question. What happened during the last phase gate? I looked confused. Then whispered, she went inside. I stayed outside. They said that was the rule. Who are they? Echo, I said. Echo and the builders. Then the screen went black. I stumbled away from the desk. My mouth was dry. My hands were shaking. Hallie was asleep again, but not in the bed. On the floor, lying flat, hands at her sides, eyes half open, humming, always humming. I tried to shake her awake. She didn't respond. I said her name louder. Nothing. Then she whispered, softly, lips barely moving. She's not gone. She's just watching from the other side. I asked, who is? Hallie smiled, still half asleep, and said, me. I started digging through the rest of the files. The deeper ones, hidden behind nested folders with scrambled names. Eventually, I found what looked like a manifest. A long spreadsheet of names, dates, test results. Under Phase Gate B, Cycle 3, I found a match. Subject name, redacted. Status, mirror insertion complete. Counterpart, Hallie. Sync level, 98.6%. Notes, host showing recursive memory bleed, reinforce layers or dispose. That was me, host, not mother, not even subject, host. And Hallie wasn't becoming something. She already was, something that had been mirrored into me. And I was the vessel. But here's the part that makes me doubt everything. Later that night, I found a letter taped to the underside of the sink. Addressed to me, in my own handwriting. It said, you'll forget again. That's how the cycle works. You always get this far. You always run. But now you've seen it early enough. You're starting to wake up before the collapse. That means you might have a choice this time. But remember, she is not your child. She is you. Before, the project isn't about raising her. It's about reabsorbing her. And they want to see if you'll choose yourself, or set her free. If you do nothing, the mirror completes. And next time, there won't be a you to write this. Choose. I burned the letter, because I didn't know what else to do. And the next morning, Hallie looked at me and said, in a voice too calm. Mommy, did you choose yet? I didn't answer her. What answer could I give? She was playing with blocks by then. Stacking them into careful towers, humming again. But I noticed something different. She wasn't humming randomly. She was repeating. Exactly. Each note matched the last. A perfect loop. 40 seconds long. Then it started again. 40 seconds. Exactly. I started recording it. Looped the audio. I ran it through the same waveform software again, just like before. And I noticed something I'd missed last time. Buried in the pattern, just barely visible, was my name. Not spoken, not audible, but encoded in pitch intervals. Like a digital watermark. My name. In her hum. Every loop carried it, which meant this wasn't just mimicry. She was carrying something back to me. Like a message. Like I'd sent myself a code years ago, and now it was returning through her voice. A reflection. A signal. And the worst part? I remembered sending it. The flash hit me while I was brushing my teeth. Not a memory. Not a thought. A sequence. Me, strapped to a table. Monitors on my head. A figure beside me whispering. She'll find it when the clock resets. And then the voice said. You'll know you're waking up when she starts to sing your name. I tried to act normal that morning. Tried to feed her, change her, dress her. Routine always helped me feel real. But when I went to grab her shirt from the bag, I noticed something tucked into the pocket. Another note. Tiny. Folded 6 times. Written in the same handwriting as the cabin letter, my own. You've reached loop 12. You never make it past 13. Each time you choose her, they restart. Each time you choose you, she dissolves. There is no third option. But you keep trying. If you're reading this, it means you still don't believe what you are. But she does. Ask her what happened in room 9. Room 9? I had no idea what that meant. But that night, as I laid her down and kissed her forehead, I said softly, "Baby, what happened in room 9?" She opened her eyes slowly and said, "They turned off the walls." That's when you cried. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked, "What walls?" And she answered, voice low, mechanical. "The memory walls. The ones they build so you don't walk through yourself." I left the cabin again. Didn't care where I went. I just drove. Endless trees, highways, tunnels, fields, none of it mattered. But then I saw something strange. In a small town, middle of nowhere, I passed a school. And something about it froze me. Because it was the same school from a dream I'd had dozens of times over the years. The yellow bricks, the cracked steps, the single swing set out front. And a classroom window, fourth from the left, with a long scratch in the glass. I parked. I walked toward the school like I'd been there yesterday. Inside, it was empty. Dusty. But the doors weren't locked. I wandered the halls, unsure what I was looking for, until I reached room 9. The door was ajar, and inside, everything looked exactly like the dreams. A chalkboard with a broken corner. Desks arranged in a tight U. A single name written on the whiteboard in red marker. Hallie. I stood there shaking, my breath shallow. Then I heard it, the hum, not from the room, from my chest. I looked down, my phone, the one I hadn't touched in hours, was vibrating. No caller ID. I answered, no voice, just the hum, looping, and beneath it, like a second layer, came a whisper I almost didn't catch. It said, "You're not the host anymore. You're the copy. She's the original now." I fell, literally. My legs just stopped listening. I collapsed into one of the tiny desks and stared ahead. Copy? Then who had I been? Was the journal mine? Was the voice mine? Was I even mine? Then the overhead lights flickered. And I saw, just for a second, my own reflection in the blackboard. Except it wasn't quite me. The eyes were too wide. The mouth slightly off-center. But the worst part? The reflection wasn't mimicking me. It moved a second before I did. Like I was the one catching up. I left the school in a haze. Drove back to the cabin. Hallie was asleep when I got there. And beside her, on the bed, was a new drawing. Crayons. Childlike, but deliberate. 2 figures. One small, one big. The small one was holding a string. The big one was attached to the string. Like a balloon. Above it, she'd written 3 words, phonetically. I pull you. I turned over the drawing. On the back, written in block letters in red crayon. Next loop starts soon. You should rest. And underneath it, in perfect cursive. You're always tired by now. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I could feel it. The reset. It wasn't coming like an event. It wasn't external. It was already inside me. Like a pressure behind the eyes, a taste in the mouth that doesn't belong to anything you've eaten. Like the weight of memory before the memory arrives. The air felt tight, not cold, not hot, just wrong, like it had forgotten how to move. Hallie was still asleep, peaceful, still, but her hand was twitching slightly. And every 30 seconds, she would mouth something silently. Always the same motion. I filmed it, slowed it down, watched it frame by frame. And I saw what it was. She was mouthing the word, again. At 3:17 a.m., the humming started. But it wasn't from her. It was from outside the cabin. Like a chorus in the woods. Dozens of voices, all tuned slightly off from each other. Not loud, not threatening, just there. I opened the door. No wind, no animals. But I saw something glowing in the trees. Shapes, reflective panels, hung from branches, spinning slowly, each one angled in a different direction. Each one pointed toward the cabin. Mirrors, tiny, curved, warped. And on one of them, I saw myself. Not my reflection, me, standing in the cabin doorway, wearing the same clothes, holding nothing, but in the mirror, I was holding her. I blinked, and the mirror turned, gone. Back inside, I found the journal again. Not the one from the box. A new one, sitting on the table, already open. This time, the handwriting was neat. Almost printed. The first page said, "This is where you always decide. Not when you read this. When you write it, look at your hands." I did. They were covered in ink. Blue. Fresh. There was a pen beside the journal. I turned the page. A full entry. Written by me. Today's date. And it described everything I had just done. The school. The photo. The cabin. Except it ended with a sentence I hadn't written. And this time, she's going to let me go. I heard the door creak open behind me. Turned. No one. Then I turned back to the journal and found a photo tucked between the pages. A Polaroid of Hallie, but she was older, maybe 15, standing in a room I didn't recognize. She was holding a journal. This journal, and she was smiling. Behind her, me, also older, standing still, eyes closed, and in the bottom corner, written in shaky pen. Loop 14, first shared memory. I dropped the photo, fell to my knees, because in that moment, I remembered it, that day, that room, the way it smelled, the way she looked at me and said, "You're early this time." I knew then, it was never about escaping. It was never about saving her. There was no her. There was no me. Only the pattern, the loop, the test, every cycle designed to see if I could differentiate between love and self-preservation. Between parent and mirror, because the moment I chose to protect her, I was completing her loop. And the moment I chose to abandon her, I was choosing myself, and both options meant the loop would start again. There was only one choice I'd never made. To do nothing, to let it play out. To not run, not fight, not escape, just be. So I stayed. That morning, I made pancakes. Hallie laughed when I burned one. We danced in the kitchen. She hummed. I didn't record it. I didn't write anything down. I didn't search the woods or dig through memories or decode sound waves. I was present, and for the first time, the air felt normal. Until 8:13 p.m., when the sun started to set, and I noticed something on her arm. A scar. Faint, small, right below the elbow. I didn't remember her ever getting hurt. She never had an injury there. I asked, "Hallie, what happened to your arm?" She looked at it, confused. Then she smiled and said, "You gave it to me." I froze. She added, "When I used to be you." And then, the power went out. The next part 1 don't remember fully. Only flashes. A bright hallway. 2 doors, both open. Her on one side, reaching. Me on the other, afraid. And a voice, his voice, narrating. Each loop teaches them who they were. But only pain lets them choose who they become. I woke up in a hospital bed. Alone. No memory of how I got there. A nurse walked in, smiled. Asked if I knew what year it was. I said yes. I was right, but she looked confused anyway. "You've been out for 3 days, she said. Then she handed me a box of my belongings. Inside, a journal, blank, a photo, Hallie, but younger again. Maybe 2, wearing the same dress from the beginning. And a note, just 1 line, written in my handwriting. "This time you got farther." I was discharged the next day. No one asked more questions. No one came looking for Hallie. No file, no records, no missing persons report. She had been written out again. Loop 14 had ended, or had started, or maybe, both. And now I sit here, writing this. Because I know I'll forget again soon. And when I do, I'll come back here. To this post. To the place where I always leave myself breadcrumbs. So if you're reading this, future me, listen. Don't look for her. Don't try to break the pattern. Don't scream when you see your reflection move first. Just let her sing. Let her pull you. Let her become whatever she's meant to. Because the mirror always finishes the story. And you're just the pen.